When I was 17 years old, I started to get to know the Institute. I also discovered Ascension. I don't know why, but it touched me so much that I wanted to apply for admission on August 18th, that I wanted to apply for membership on the 18th of August, the anniversary of his death, entrusting my vocation to her and asking her to help me to be like her, to be like her. That's the thing about saints decades later. Their lives continue to mark the lives of many people. What was so extraordinary about Ascension? Nothing. And everything? Let's see. From a good family? Yes. Ascension was a girl born into a family of notary parents in Sonseca, Toledo, on the 15th of June, 1911, Solemnity of Corpus Christi. At first, because she did not like going to school, she found it difficult to get up in the morning. Had trouble getting up in the mornings. And when her mother invited her to make some small sacrifice, she would reply that she already made too many. She would eat everything she could think of. At the age of 7, Ascension received her first communion. And from then on, despite her age, the Eucharist was at the center of her life. The Eucharist was the center of her life. Already at the age of 12, she organized the Eucharistic Thursday choir in her parish. From that time on, she began a journey of maturity. She grew up early in the morning, helping out, even studying on her own. Because the girls in the family did not go to school, remember the times we are living in? This young woman started working as a secretary in her father's notary's office. And there she learned many things that she would never have imagined. What they would be useful for her in the future. Every summer, she traveled to Santander, where she helped her sister Pilar with her nephews and nieces and took part in the Catholic action courses. She was convinced that she needed to train and prepare herself to be able to do good for others. And she later promoted this movement in Villacañas in her hometown. At first, they began to meet in the room of her sister Luisina, who was ill. But they had to move because the number of participants began to increase. And after that came the centers and the catechesis, and visits began. And he deployed a great apostolate from there. But we went through with the wind against us. As you know, the situation is getting more and more complicated, and the atmosphere is getting more and more hostile, to the point where the catechists of the village were stoned. Despite the mayor's position, they rented premises to continue the work of Catholic action, although he later closed them down. They continued to meet, albeit behind closed doors, in the Chapel of Christ. In the Chapel of Christ. The more persecuted they felt, the more they wanted to prepare themselves for doing good, and especially those who wished them ill. The summer came and she returned to Santander, not knowing that she would have to stay there for years because of the outbreak of civil war. This he learned from a friend of a priest who was still ministering clandestinely that he would have to stay there for years because of the outbreak of the civil war. Clandestinely. And then went to one of those houses that had become a kind of parish church in order to go to confession. That priest was Doroteo Hernandez, who was imprisoned from April to August of the 27th century, and then founded almost without realizing it, as he says, what was to become our institute in December of the same year. On Good Friday of the year 1838, he presented Ascension to the other members of what would become the Institute, who welcomed it with great joy. And so began her dedication, taking part in the apostolates, such as the prison apostolate, and helping her sister and nieces in those hard times. When they received the news of the death of all her brothers and sisters. At the end of the war, the time came to look for the rest of his family, of which he knew nothing, and to continue living her vocation wherever God wanted her to go. And so we come to 70 times 7. He returned to his village where they resumed the activities of Catholic action. But Ascension, as they said, was no longer the same, although it was not visible on the outside. It was still changing. She devoted herself to the apostolate there, but always united to the Institute and to the founder, even at a distance and at that time. She was not preoccupied, but rather occupied herself with true denial of things, with maturity and trust in providence, seeking resources, giving talks, organizing excursions, cultural visits, catechesis, with a joy that was contagious all around him. But not only that, he became an apostle of forgiveness, to the point that one young woman admitted that he avoided talking to her because she knew that if she asked him to forgive those who had done so much harm to her family, she would not be able to refuse. She had that special authority. Breaking new ground. What a great work she was doing, but God had other plans for her. The time had come to take flight. The little work, which was taking its first steps, was called to Madrid to take care of what would later become the Merced Hostel, for women coming out of prison. But it was certainly madness. It was a very complicated apostolate. The resources were very scarce for everyone, and even more so for them. We didn't have any work. A priori, no crusade could take the step of leaving everything behind, literally, to take on this work. And this Ascension is the one that does it. It is only with blind trust in God that he says yes. He leaves his home, his family, his village, his apostolate, and goes to share a roof and a life with these young women to try to show them another way that will make them discover their true dignity and give them hope for a different future. We know how hard it is to make a furrow. As she herself says, breaking heels, management problems, a young pioneer in a man's world among people who often didn't even believe in her. But very close to the CEO and the founder, she continues her tireless struggle to try to realize what she believes to be God's will. She made only one condition, and that was not easy to achieve: the tabernacle. Without it, I dare not. Opening paths, teaching a new way of life, trying out that life of autonomy without independence. So far from the people who were her support, but knowing that she was not alone. How many letters we have collected? He knew how to live the elevated being of his own soul with an astonishing fidelity, even in the smallest things. She made it a reality to become all things to all people, adapting herself to the person in front of her, to the situation, being in the world but not of the world. The mission with the girls in the hostel, I was in people, 24 hours a day, in which she took advantage of the minute she could to go to the chapel and place herself and her work in the hands of the Lord. Like that person who is diving and sticks her head out to breathe as a real necessity. This is how she lived this apostolic ascension. She knew how to be a mother, both for the crusades of her team and for the young girls who were sheltered, convinced that if they were not better, it was because she was not. They were not better, it was because she was not. She went out of her way to make sure that the girls knew the unconditional love of God through her, while at the same time fighting for whatever it took to improve their conditions, making it possible for them to do dignified work, to learn trades for which they could receive, that they could learn trades for which they would receive some remuneration, that they could save money, and that this would motivate them to move forward. All along the way, there was no lack of misunderstandings and even slander, but she managed to carry on with admirable peace, which she bore with admirable peace. And then came the day of triumph. With this phrase, Ascension left the hostel by ambulance to the infectious diseases hospital. Today is the day of triumph. And this is when we repeat the words of Saint Teresa: if you treat your friends like this, no wonder you have so few friends. No wonder you have so few. Alone, isolated, Her health was getting worse by the minute, and her father, the founder, was not arriving. Knowing that the time was approaching, she serenely received the sacraments and made her perpetual profession, with a priest who did not even breathe in her, and she knew it. The ring on a plate in the King's Hospital is an image that sums up this moment well. And Far, who was traveling by car from Santander with Ascension's mother, was not arriving. At one stop, he phoned to ask how she was doing and sent her last blessing, and sent him his last blessing. Lord, whatever you want, whenever you want, as you wish, wherever you want, but with your grace. Sola, not a step. Her thoughts at the moment, her concern, were the others. As for the crusades, it doesn't matter if they are few. What is needed is for them to be gold-plated. For the girls, tell them to be good. For all, ask a lot for me, all the way to heaven. His last words were for Our Lady. Pray for us. We have recourse to you. 35 years old, he had reached the finish line. What pain for the founder! At 11 o'clock at night they arrived, and before that peaceful face he wept and prayed. And we hadn't realized it. That's just it. Until then, they hadn't noticed. They hadn't been aware of the holiness of Ascension, at doing it ordinary, extraordinarily well done. Nor had she. A holiness that is not only admirable, but above all imitable. It is the true living of our motto, all for Jesus and for souls. But from that moment on, a multitudinous funeral. Constant visits to her grave, first in the Chamartin cemetery, and then in the Almudena cemetery, where she was transferred. Petitions, favors, graces, poems, centers and social works with her name, biographies, objects that people had kept as relics, hundreds of letters. Even the founder kept them and had them underlined. For us, a saint. And so on, to this day and up to here.